To understand what happened on that November afternoon, we have to understand the man drinking the tea. His name was Alexander Litvinenko. He was 43 years old. He was a father, a husband, and until 6 years earlier, he had been a lieutenant colonel in the FSB, the Russian Federal Security Service, the successor agency to the KGB. Litvinenko was not an ordinary officer. He had worked in a unit that investigated organized crime, and according to his own public statements, he had been ordered by his superiors to carry out actions he refused to perform. In 1998, he did something almost unheard of in Russian intelligence. He held a press conference in Moscow, sitting alongside 4 colleagues, and publicly accused senior FSB leadership of ordering an assassination. That press conference ended his career. It also, arguably, ended his safety. By 2000, Litvinenko had fled Russia with his wife Marina and their young son Anatoly. He was granted asylum in the United Kingdom. He settled in North London. He became a British citizen in October 2006, a fact he was reportedly proud of. He worked as a consultant, an author, and a source for journalists and intelligence services investigating Russian organized crime and the Kremlin's overseas activities. He was not hiding, he was writing. He had co-authored books alleging that the FSB itself had orchestrated the 1999 Russian apartment bombings, allegations the Russian government fiercely denied. And here is what nobody tells you about his life in London. Litvinenko was not simply a defector living quietly on a pension. He was actively, publicly, and by name accusing the most powerful people in Moscow of murder. If this case is gripping you, save this video. You will want to come back to this one. For 6 years, he lived. And then in the autumn of 2006, he agreed to meet 2 men he had known from his old life. That decision would kill him. The first meeting on November 1st happened around 3 in the afternoon at Itsu, a sushi restaurant on Piccadilly. Litvinenko met an Italian contact named Mario Scaramella. They talked. They ate. Nothing seemed unusual. Later that same afternoon, Litvinenko took the London Underground to the Millennium Hotel in Grosvenor Square. He was there to meet 2 former colleagues from Russia, Andrei Lugovoy, a former officer of the Federal Protective Service, and Dmitry Kovtun, a former Soviet Army officer and Lugovoy's business associate. The 3 men sat down at the Pine Bar. Litvinenko was reportedly offered tea from a pot that was already on the table. He drank only a small amount. He would later say it tasted unpleasant. Cold, he left the meeting. He rode home on the bus. He kissed his wife. He went to bed. By midnight, he was violently ill. Marina, his wife, initially assumed food poisoning, but the illness did not pass. Over the following days, it became something else entirely. Litvinenko's hair began to fall out. His white blood cell count collapsed. His organs began, one by one, to fail. He was admitted to Barnet General Hospital and then transferred to University College Hospital in central London, where a specialized team began treating what they now believed was a case of intentional poisoning. But which poison? That was the question that stumped some of the best toxicologists in Britain. Thallium was suspected, a heavy metal poison famous from Cold War assassinations. Radioactive thallium was tested for. Nothing matched. The doctors were running out of options, and Litvinenko was running out of time. And here is where the story pivots, because we will get to the moment that broke this case wide open in a moment, and that is where it gets counterintuitive. The clue that solved the murder came not from a doctor, but from a machine that was almost never used. On November 22nd, doctors ordered a gamma spectroscopy test, an examination of the specific radioactive signature in Litvinenko's body. The initial scan showed nothing unusual. The equipment was calibrated to detect gamma radiation, the kind released by most known radioactive poisons. Polonium does not emit meaningful gamma radiation. It emits alpha particles. It is, from the perspective of a standard hospital scanner, almost invisible. Almost. A tiny spike appeared at the very edge of the reading. A signature that should not have been there. A signature that pointed to one of the rarest and most controlled substances on Earth. Alexander Litvinenko died on November 23, 2006, one day after his own body finally revealed what had killed him. Polonium. It is a byproduct of nuclear reactor operations. It exists in the natural world only in trace amounts. To acquire enough of it to kill a man requires a nuclear facility. Global production is measured in grams per year. Most of the world's supply comes from a single reactor in Russia. That single fact reframed the entire investigation. This was not a crime of passion. It was not a lone actor. This was a substance whose supply chain led inevitably to a state. Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command took over the case. What they discovered next is one of the most remarkable pieces of forensic detective work in modern history. Because polonium-210, invisible to the naked eye and undetectable to standard scanners, leaves behind something extraordinary: a trail. When touched, when spilled, when handled, It contaminates surfaces, and those surfaces glow, not to the human eye, but to specialized alpha radiation detectors. Investigators began sweeping London, and what they found was staggering. Contamination at the Pine Bar of the Millennium Hotel, on a teapot, on a cup, on a chair. Contamination at the Sheraton Park Lane. Contamination at the Best Western Hotel on Shaftesbury Avenue. Contamination at an office in Grosvenor Street. Contamination at a football stadium, the Emirates, where Litvinenko's suspects had attended a match. Contamination at a lap dancing club. Contamination on the seats of British Airways aircraft that had flown between London and Moscow. Contamination in hotel rooms where the suspects had stayed on prior visits to London, visits made before the successful assassination. This was crucial, because the trail did not just show where the poison had been used. It showed where it had been carried, handled, and investigators believed spilled during earlier failed attempts. The evidence suggested that the poisoning of November 1st was not the first attempt. It was the third. The trail led directly to Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. Every room they had stayed in, every plane they had flown on, every meeting they had taken in London was contaminated. And critically, in the Pine Bar itself, the concentration of polonium was highest inside the teapot from which Litvinenko had drunk. The United Kingdom requested Lugovoy's extradition. Russia refused, citing its constitutional prohibition on extraditing its own citizens. Lugovoy went on to become a member of the Russian State Duma, granting him parliamentary immunity. Kovtun remained in Moscow. Neither man has ever stood trial in a British court. In 2016, after a public inquiry led by Sir Robert Owen, the United Kingdom formally concluded that Lugovoy and Kovtun had carried out the killing, and that the operation was, in the inquiry's words, probably approved by the then director of the FSB, Nikolai Patrushev, and by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Russian government has consistently and categorically denied any involvement. Set aside the geopolitics for a moment. Consider the crime itself as a psychological artifact. Because for criminal analysts, the Litvinenko assassination is a case study in what is sometimes called signature killing at the state level. An assassin who wants a target dead has many options. A bullet, a staged accident, a common poison. Any of these would have killed Alexander Litvinenko. Any of these would have been vastly easier to execute. Why polonium? The answer, according to intelligence analysts who have studied the case, lies in a concept called deniable deterrence. Polonium is nearly impossible to detect through routine medical testing. In a slightly different world, a world where doctors never ordered that specific gamma scan, or where Litvinenko had died a day earlier, the cause of death might have been recorded as simple organ failure. Undiagnosed, unexplained. Just another sick man who slipped away in a London hospital. But polonium leaves a fingerprint. It is traceable to its country of origin through isotopic analysis. Investigators can determine which reactor produced a specific sample by examining the ratio of trace impurities within it. Some analysts believe this was not a bug in the plan. It was a feature, a message, quiet enough to permit official denial, loud enough to be understood by every other defector, journalist, and dissenter watching from abroad. The psychology of the perpetrators, whoever authorized this operation, is the psychology of demonstration. The point was not simply to kill one man. The point was to communicate, without ever admitting to it, the reach and the willingness of the actor behind it. This is a pattern criminologists recognize from organized crime, from cartel violence, from state-sponsored intimidation across history. The murder itself becomes secondary to the story the murder tells. There is one more layer. Litvinenko, on his deathbed, dictated a statement. In it, he directly named Vladimir Putin as the person he believed had ordered his killing. He described his own murder as an act intended to silence him, and predicted correctly that it would not. His statement, read aloud after his death, became one of the most quoted accusations of the 21st century. In the strange calculus of criminal psychology, the victim, in dying, gave testimony that no living witness could have provided. CTA 1213 Min. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel is for people who want the real forensic story behind the headlines. Every day I publish a new case, cold cases cracked by DNA decades later, forgotten murders solved by a single overlooked detail, and investigations like this one where the science itself becomes the smoking gun. Subscribe and hit the bell icon, new case every day. Because the next case I'm covering involves a woman who was told her sister died in a car accident in 1987, and a single hair, tested 36 years later, revealed she had been lied to her entire life. But that is only half the story. And before you go, drop this in the comments. If you found yourself in Alexander Litvinenko's position, a defector marked, alone in a foreign city, would you have taken that meeting at the hotel? Would you have trusted an old colleague? I want to hear it. Outro 1315 Min. Alexander Litvinenko was buried in Highgate Cemetery in North London, not far from the grave of Karl Marx. His coffin was lined with lead. The polonium in his body was, by then, still emitting radiation. His widow, Marina, spent the next decade of her life fighting for the British public inquiry that ultimately confirmed what her husband had told her in his final days. No one has ever been convicted for the murder. The two prime suspects live openly in Russia, and yet the case is not unsolved. It is, in every meaningful forensic and evidentiary sense, closed. The polonium trail across London remains one of the most detailed forensic records of an assassination ever assembled. Investigators can point hotel room by hotel room, seat by seat, to the exact path of the men who did it. What is missing is not the truth. What is missing is the reach of the law. And that, in the end, is what the Litvinenko case reveals about modern crime. That evidence and justice are not the same thing. That a killer can be named, tracked, and forensically identified, and still walk free, protected by a border. That the science can win and the case can still lose. If this hit, my video on the 1978 London umbrella assassination of Georgy Markov will make even more sense now, because the two cases, separated by nearly 3 decades, share more than just a city. They share a signature, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. London, November 2006. A former Russian intelligence officer sits down for tea at a Mayfair hotel and is dead within 3 weeks. The murder weapon, a substance so rare and so tightly controlled that it took some of Britain's best toxicologists to even identify it. This is the full forensic story of the Alexander Litvinenko assassination, the polonium-210 trail that stretched across London, the investigation that reconstructed the killer's every move, and the criminal psychology of an operation designed to send a message the world could not ignore. Based on the 2016 UK public inquiry findings, court documents, and verified reporting, 00, 00 the hook 00, 30 the man who knew too much 03, 00 the meeting at the Pine Bar 06, 00 the invisible fingerprint 09, 00 the psychology of deniable deterrence 12, 00 justice beyond borders 13, 00 final reflections. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for a new true crime case every day. Cold cases, forensic breakthroughs, and the investigations that changed criminal science. Keywords: Litvinenko polonium case, London 2006 assassination, Russian spy murder, polonium-210 forensics, true crime documentary, Cold War era crimes, FSB defector cases.